There's a moment, and every student remembers it, when you first realize that the universe is bigger than anything your home planet ever taught you. For most of us, that moment happened on the shuttle ride to Vithara Station. I was sitting near the observation window, the kind of window that wraps around the hull in a slow curve, made of compressed silicate glass layered over impact polymer, so thick you could lean your full body weight against it and it wouldn't so much as flex. Outside, the stars weren't twinkling the way they do from a planetary surface. They were just there, fixed, hard, ancient, like nails driven into the darkness. I'm Sorathi. If you don't know what that means, and most humans don't, think of something between a deer and a secretary bird, except we stand upright. We have 4 fingers on each hand, and our emotional state is visible in the chromatophores along our neck and jaw. Calm is a pale gold. Stress is a deep amber. Fear is a kind of blue-white that you really, really don't want other people to see. I was sitting near the window, trying very hard to look pale gold. My neck was almost certainly blue-white. Around me, 17 other students from 11 different species were doing similar things, performing calm, trying not to look at each other too hard, all of us very aware that we'd been selected for the Galactic Academic Exchange Program's Advanced Field Studies cohort, which was one of the most competitive academic placements in the known settled systems. And all of us were also very aware of what that meant. It meant we were going somewhere that most species avoided. It meant the assignment we were about to receive was classified as a Category 7 learning environment. Category 7. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The Galactic Academic Exchange rates learning environments from Category 1, a controlled classroom setting, filtered air, padded furniture, all the way up to Category 7, which is the official designation for environments where the probability of student mortality exceeds a calculated threshold that most academic councils would rather not put in writing. Category 7 environments are only legal for one reason. The humans approved them. You have to understand what humanity means in the broader galactic context, not the cultural stuff, the art, the music, the strange fascination with competitive fermentation. I mean the biological context, the atmospheric context. When the Galactic Survey Commission first catalogued Earth, they almost didn't bother sending a follow-up team. The initial drone survey flagged the planet as a biohazard, not because of pollution or contamination, because of what was living there. The oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere was operating at concentrations that, for most species, cause cellular oxidative damage at a rate incompatible with long-term survival. The gravitational index was nearly double the galactic average for inhabited worlds. The surface temperature range spanned something like 90 degrees Celsius over the course of a single year in some regions, and the native biosphere, the animals, the plants, the fungi, even had evolved in that environment and come out aggressive, adaptive, and deeply inconvenient. And then the humans evolved. Not gently, not gradually. Not in a comfortable niche where survival was easy and competition was minimal. They evolved on the most dangerous continent of that already dangerous world, in conditions that would have sterilized the ecosystems of 60% of known inhabited planets, in a 4.5 billion year pressure cooker that apparently decided the best possible outcome was a medium-sized omnivore with exceptional endurance, complex social bonding, creative problem-solving, and this is the part that still makes my chromatophores flare: pain tolerance. Pain tolerance. Most species evolved pain as a stop signal. You feel pain, you stop doing the thing. That's the biological purpose. It's a warning system. Humans evolved pain as information. They feel it, they categorize it, they decide whether it's relevant, and then they continue anyway if the goal is important enough. The first xenobiologist who properly documented this came back from Earth with what her colleagues later described as the expression of someone who has seen something they cannot unknow. She wasn't wrong. So that's the context. The 18 of us were on a shuttle heading toward Vethara Station, which is the academic processing hub for Category 7 field assignments. The station itself is fine. It's a standard pressurized structure, comfortable atmosphere ratios, food synthesis that can accommodate most dietary needs. The station is Category 1. What the station administers is another matter. Our program coordinator was a Drelathi named Suvek. Drelathi are tall, slow-moving, vaguely arboreal species, 6 limbs, 2 of which they use as arms, muted coloring, and a voice that sounds like someone playing a cello very quietly in the next room. Suvek had been running the Advanced Field Studies cohort for 11 cycles. He had the demeanor of someone who had seen students panic so many times that he developed a kind of gentle, professional compassion for it. He came into the cabin about 2 hours before docking and stood at the front of the group, and he waited for us to settle. "I'd like to address the question I know most of you are sitting with," he said. "Yes, you have been assigned to a Category 7 field study. Yes, the environment involves conditions that are physiologically challenging for non-human species. And yes," he paused and looked around the cabin with those pale, slow-blinking eyes, "you will be accompanied by a human student." The cabin was quiet. Then Wurak, a Thuvian, stocky and blue-shelled, from a species that processes emotional states through vibrations rather than facial expressions, made a sound like a very low drum note. That was the Thuvian equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "One human," said Ileva, the Meridian student sitting 2 seats forward of me. Meridians are bipedal, 3-eyed, and tend to speak with a precision that sounds almost aggressive. "One human for the entire field team." "One human student," Suvek said. "Field Studies Cohort Protocol." The human is a third-year student in the exchange program, enrolled in the Applied Ecological Crisis Management track. Their name is Marcus Akafer. They have completed 2 previous field assignments in. "Excuse me," said Pylos, who was Faranathi, elongated, pale, extraordinarily polite. "You said student. This is a student assignment as well, for the human." "Correct." "So," Pylos blinked all 3 of his translucent eyelids in sequence, which I'd learned meant he was processing something uncomfortable. "We are all students." "Yes." "And the human is also a student." "Also yes." "And we are going to a Category 7 environment." "Correct." "And the human is going to a Category 7 environment as a student." Suvek looked at Pylos with that calm, cello patience. "That is what I said, yes." Pylos sat back. We all sat back. Because the thing was, we all understood what that meant. A Category 7 environment was, for us, the most extreme field placement available. It was extreme precisely because it approached the conditions of a death world. Specifically, it was designed to push non-human students right up to the edge of their physiological tolerances, to teach adaptation under pressure, to build resilience. For a human student, it was homework. Marcus Akafer was already on Vethara Station when we docked. I saw him through the transparent wall of the arrival concourse before we went through the airlock. He was standing near a loading pallet, talking to one of the station workers, a Gret, all 4 arms moving as they worked through some kind of checklist. Marcus was holding a cup of something hot, judging by the steam. He was wearing the gray and blue field jacket of the exchange program. He was laughing at something the Gret worker had said. He was not a large human by human standards, from what I understood. Medium height, medium build. He had deep brown skin and close-cut hair, and he moved with a quality I'd noticed in other humans, a kind of economical ease, like every motion was efficient without being hurried. Like his body had never really had to worry about whether it was capable, so it just did things. He had a scar along his left forearm. Long and pale against his skin, slightly raised. I found out later it was from a field assignment in his first year. He'd entered a collapsing biostructure to extract monitoring equipment that would have been lost otherwise. He'd done it because the data was important. He thought that was a reasonable reason. When we came through the airlock and into the concourse, Marcus looked up, spotted Suvek, and crossed the floor toward us. The Gret worker gave him a four-armed wave. Marcus waved back with one hand, still carrying his cup. "Hey," he said to Suvek, "shuttle was early." 12 minutes, Suvek said. "Nice, good tailwind." He looked at the rest of us. 18 alien students of varying sizes, shapes, chromatic expressions, and barely concealed anxiety levels. He smiled. It was a warm smile. It did not appear to be performed. "Hey, everyone, I'm Marcus. I've been told I'm your, what did the committee call it?" "Environmental liaison," Suvek said. "Right, environmental liaison." Marcus nodded, like he found the title mildly amusing. "Which basically means I'm the one who goes first when we're not sure if something is going to go badly. Sound good?" Nobody said anything. Marcus took a sip from his cup. "That was a joke," he said, "mostly." The station briefing took the better part of a day. We were assigned to a field study on Carveth IV, which is, and I want to be clear about this, a planet that the Galactic Survey Commission classified as conditionally habitable for species with Category 3 or higher biological tolerance ratings. The atmosphere was approximately 74% nitrogen, 23% oxygen, with trace gases that included compounds that would be genuinely toxic to some of the more sensitive students in our cohort. The surface gravity was 1.3 times galactic standard. The active weather patterns included what the briefing materials called dynamic precipitation events, which is the scientific way to say that it rained there with enough force to strip bark from trees. The ecosystem was described as robust and adversarial. That meant the animals would try to eat you. Not all of them. Some of them just had territorial behaviors that expressed themselves in ways that could cause significant physical trauma. The briefing materials were very careful about language. Significant physical trauma appeared 11 times in the document. The assignment itself was a 3-phase field study. Phase 1 involved establishing a base camp in a specified grid quadrant, setting up environmental monitoring equipment, and cataloging the immediate ecosystem. Phase 2 involved recovering a lost data cache from a previous survey mission, which had been abandoned when the previous team encountered a weather event and had to evacuate. Phase 3 involved extracting all personnel and equipment safely, completing the dataset, and producing a field report. The total estimated duration was 4 days. The Phase 2 recovery task was the one that made everyone quiet. The lost data cache was located in Grid Sector 7G, which the briefing materials noted was an area of elevated environmental complexity. Translation: it was in the most dangerous part of the region we were already going to. One of the students, Vethrix, a Calanthe, who has this very distinctive habit of making a clicking sound with their secondary jaw when they're stressed, said, very quietly, and who performs the Phase 2 recovery. Suvek said, "The team." "The whole team." Protocol requires at minimum 2 personnel for cache recovery. The rest will maintain base camp operations. "And the 2 who go to Sector 7G. Vethrix's secondary jaw was clicking at a rate I found deeply unsettling. "Will be Marcus," said Suvek, and then he paused and looked around the room and one volunteer. Every single one of us looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the holographic terrain map of Sector 7G, with the expression of someone reading a moderately interesting menu. "What are the precipitation odds for days 2 and 3? He asked. Suvek pulled up the weather data. Marcus looked at it, nodded slowly, and said, "Okay, that's manageable." Vethrix's secondary jaw clicked so fast it almost sounded continuous. The shuttle to Carveth IV carried the 19 of us plus 1,200 kilograms of equipment, and I spent the descent with my forehead against the cold hull wall, watching the planet come up through the porthole. It was green, not the soft, domesticated green of agricultural worlds, or the pale mint green of oxygen-producing algae fields. It was green the way something is green when it has been competing for survival for a very long time and has won, consistently, for several 100 million years. Dense canopy, dark understory. The mountains were barely visible through cloud cover that seemed to move with purpose. When we broke through the cloud layer, the turbulence hit and half the cabin grabbed for handhold straps. The shuttle shook. The hull groaned the way hulls do when atmospheric pressure is doing something the designers technically accounted for, but didn't design for comfort. I heard Marcus, who was sitting 3 rows ahead of me, say, "There it is," in a tone of voice that I can only describe as pleased. Part 2, the first day. Landing was rough. Not unsafe. Suvek had said that several times. Not unsafe. The landing zone was pre-cleared by automated drone, the surface was stable, and the shuttle's landing gear had been rated for 2.1 standard gravities. Carveth IV's 1.3 shouldn't have been a problem. The problem was the wind. The planet had this persistent lateral wind pattern that came off the mountain range to the north and moved through the lowland regions in long, slow rotations. Not dangerous, exactly, but present, constant. The kind of wind that makes you aware of your own weight, your own surface area, the fact that the atmosphere is a physical force and you are a physical object inside it. When the shuttle ramp came down and the atmosphere hit us for the first time, even through the environmental suits we were all wearing, every non-human student in the group made some kind of involuntary sound. Warek made the low drum sound again. Ileva made a sound like a high-pitched creak, which for Meridians is surprise. I made no sound. My neck went blue-white from collarbone to jawline. Marcus walked down the ramp, stood at the bottom, tilted his head back and took a breath. Through his suit speaker his voice came calm and even. "Yeah, this is a good one." He meant it. He genuinely meant it. Setting up base camp was a 3-hour operation, and I will say this about Marcus, he worked. I don't mean he worked like someone filling time until the interesting part. I mean he worked with a particular quality of focus that I'd never seen in quite that way before. He knew every piece of equipment in the supply manifest. He moved between tasks without stopping. When one of the anchor stakes for the main shelter tent refused to go into the rocky ground, the soil was dense, laced through with mineral deposits that made it almost concrete hard. He got down, got a better grip on the driver tool, put his weight behind it, and drove the stake home. By hand. The tool has a mechanical assist function, a motor. Designed specifically so that a person doesn't have to provide all the force themselves. Marcus had bypassed the motor function and was just pushing. I stood there for a moment and watched. The muscles along his shoulders were visibly working. His jaw was set. He drove the stake another 4 centimeters, stopped, checked the angle, adjusted, and drove it the rest of the way. He stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands, looked at the stake and nodded. Then he went to help Pylos with the water reclamation unit. I watched him walk away and my neck did something complicated, not quite gold, not quite amber, something in between that I don't have a word for in galactic standard. That first evening, we ate around the processed air heat unit at the center of camp. The food was synthesized, the same as always, but there was something different about eating it here, on this planet under this sky, with the wind making the shelter walls flex just slightly with each gust. The sky at dusk was extraordinary. I'll say that. Carveth IV's sun was slightly redder than most inhabited worlds, and at sunset the cloud layers lit up in bands of copper and deep rose, and a particular shade of dark orange that looked, genuinely, like something on fire. For about 40 minutes, it was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen in my academic career. Then it got dark very fast, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees, and we retreated into the shelter, and Marcus helped Ileva calibrate the atmospheric sensors that had been giving spurious readings since we landed. "It's the mineral particulates," he said, leaning over the sensor unit and adjusting a contact interface. "You've got a high iron oxide content in the soil that's affecting the ambient readings. Here," he recalibrated the sensor. The readings stabilized. Ileva checked them against the shuttle's reference data. "That's accurate now," she said. She sounded surprised, the way Meridians do when someone does something they didn't expect to be done well. "Yeah, same issue came up on my second field placement," Marcus said. "Different planet, similar geology. You have to account for the local mineral signature or the sensors throw false alerts all night. You've been on 2 previous Category 7 assignments." Marcus looked up. He seemed to consider the question. "Yeah. One was a volcanic monitoring study. One was a deep ocean survey on Thresh IV." Thresh IV. I knew that name. We all knew that name. Thresh IV had made it into the academic exchange program's case study library for the wrong reasons. A previous field cohort had lost 3 members to a tidal surge event. The planet had been reclassified. It was currently under moratorium, no field studies permitted. "You were on Thresh IV," said Wurak, and the low drum sound he made was quieter than usual, almost careful. "First year," Marcus said. He went back to the sensor calibration, before the moratorium. "During the incident." Marcus looked up again. Something crossed his expression, not quite a shadow, more like a ripple. Something that existed and then was neatly folded away. "Yeah." Nobody said anything else. After a moment, Marcus finished the calibration, handed the sensor unit back to Ileva and said, "Get some sleep if you can. Phase 1 cataloging starts at 600. I did not sleep well. This is not unusual for me in field placements. The new atmosphere, even filtered through the shelter's processing system, carries trace compounds that my biology doesn't love. It's not dangerous. My suit and the shelter's filtration handled the genuinely harmful elements, but there's a low-grade wrongness to it. A signal from my own body saying this is not where you are supposed to be." I lay in my sleeping partition and listened to the wind against the shelter wall. At some point in the night, I don't know what time, local time was still calibrating on my wrist unit, I heard movement in the main area of the shelter. I got up. Marcus was at the folding table near the equipment station, reading something on a handheld display. He had a mug of something again, something hot that steamed slightly, and he was reading with the careful, methodical attention he'd applied to everything else. He looked up when I came out. "Can't sleep," he said. "No," I settled onto one of the bench seats. "You don't need much." He said it the way someone might say they don't need much sugar in their coffee, a preference, a habit, nothing remarkable. I usually do a couple hours of light sleep, and then I'm up for a while. On a field assignment. Anywhere, honestly. I sleep better when I'm monitoring something. He held up the display. I could see it was the Phase 2 terrain data, the topographic mapping for Sector 7G. The route into the cache site is actually more interesting than I expected. I looked at the map. Sector 7G was a high-elevation area, backed against the mountain range, dominated by what the survey data called destabilized geological formations, meaning rockslides were common, and cut through by a river system that was currently running high due to the recent precipitation season. "It's interesting," I said carefully. "In what way?" "The river crossing is the main challenge," Marcus said. "The cache site is on the far bank. There are 3 potential crossing points. He highlighted them on the map. And this one is the most stable based on the water depth data, but it's the furthest from the cache. That one is closest, but the bank geometry looks like it destabilizes when the water's high. And this middle one, he tapped it, has a gradient that would make the crossing harder but probably safest overall. You're planning the route. Yeah. Tonight. He looked at me, something warm and slightly amused in his expression. You have suggestions. I looked at the map more carefully. I had done coursework in field ecology, not as much as Marcus clearly, but I'd read the briefing materials thoroughly. The middle crossing, I said. It looks like the approach gradient is steep, but the bottom substrate is more uniform. Less chance of a foot placement failing. Marcus studied the map for a moment. That's a good read, he said. Is that the one you were going to choose? Yeah, he set the display down and picked up his mug. But I hadn't committed to it yet. It's useful to hear someone else come to the same conclusion. I looked at him. My chromatophores were probably gold, which was as close to comfortable as I'd felt since we arrived. Can I ask you something? Sure. The volunteer, I said. For Phase 2, who did you think it would be? Marcus looked at the map, not at me. His expression was the same, calm, focused, just slightly tilted toward thought. I figured whoever it would be, they'd be capable, he said. Suvek runs a good program. Nobody gets into the advanced cohort by accident. But going to Sector 7G is a field study, he said. That's what we're here for. He looked at me then. Are you thinking about volunteering? My neck went amber. Marcus saw it. He didn't comment on it, which I appreciated. You don't have to decide now, he said. Decisions like that are better made when you're rested. He went back to the map. I went back to my sleeping partition and eventually slept. Part 3, the cataloging. Phase 1 ran for a day and a half, and in that time I developed a different kind of understanding of what it meant to watch a human work in their element. Not a death world. Carveth IV was not a death world in the strict classification sense, but it was close enough to test everyone in our cohort in ways that were measurable and specific. The cataloging work required us to move through the terrain in pairs, taking samples, recording observations, and logging species contacts. Species contacts was the polite phrase for encounters with animals that might decide you're interesting. Marcus and I were paired together for the first cataloging shift, which happened because I was standing near him when Suvek assigned pairs, and I did not move away fast enough. The first hour was straightforward. The terrain near base camp had been partially surveyed by the preliminary drones, and the main hazard was the ground, uneven, rocky, with a tendency to shift slightly underfoot due to the mineral composition. Marcus moved through it like he'd been walking on bad terrain his whole life. Which, thinking about it later, he probably had. The second hour was when we encountered the Carvel. I don't know the galactic standard classification name. The survey team had called them Carvel because that was apparently the sound they made, a deep, percussive velv-velv sound that resonated at a frequency I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. They were large, larger than me. Roughly the mass of a mature Sorathi male, so perhaps 80 kilograms in standard gravity, and they moved through the understory with a low, deliberate efficiency. Something between a large predatory mammal and an armored amphibian, which shouldn't have been anatomically viable, but Carveth IV had clearly not gotten that memo. We heard it before we saw it. I stopped walking. Every chromatophore on my neck and jaw went immediately blue-white. My hand tightened on the sample collection tool I was carrying, which was not a weapon and could not function as one. Marcus stopped walking too, but in a different way. I stopped because my body told me to stop. Marcus stopped and oriented. He turned his head slowly toward the sound. His posture changed in a way I found difficult to describe, not tensed exactly. Not braced, more like gathered, like someone who has been operating at 70% and has just quietly shifted to 90 without making a big deal of it. Carvel, he said very quietly. Yes, I said at the same volume. Not threatened, he said, yet hear how it's spaced. The vocalization intervals. When they get threatened it goes faster. That's threat escalation. Right now it's territorial signaling. I focused on the sound. He was right, there was a pattern to it, a rhythm. What do? I whispered. We don't run, he said. Running triggers pursuit-response in a lot of predators. He reached slowly into his field pack and withdrew a small device, an ultrasonic emitter, one of the items in the standard equipment manifest that I'd assumed was for geological work. He clicked it on. We move laterally, slow, keep our profile visible, let it see we're not prey. It doesn't know what we are, I said. No, Marcus agreed. But it knows what moving fast and low looks like versus moving slow and upright. Most territorial animals respond better to the second one. We moved laterally, slow. Marcus stayed between me and the direction the sound was coming from. Not aggressively, he wasn't squaring off, wasn't making himself larger. He just positioned himself in a way that was calm and deliberate, and I realized with a kind of delayed shock, protective. The Carvel appeared at the tree line. It was looking at us. We were looking at it. For about 8 seconds nobody moved. The planet breathed around us, wind in the canopy, the distant sound of water somewhere beyond the ridge. Then the Carvel made one more velv-velv sound, turned, and moved back into the trees. Marcus watched it go. Then he let out a breath, slow, controlled, and turned off the ultrasonic emitter. You were scared, I said. He looked at me. Your breathing changed, I said, when it appeared, and your hand it was very steady, but your breathing changed. Marcus considered this for a moment. Then he said, yeah. I was scared. You didn't show it. Showing it wouldn't have helped. He clipped the emitter back onto his pack. There's a difference between feeling fear and acting on it. You feel it. You use it. You don't let it make your decisions. He said it plainly, not like a lesson, like a fact he'd learned in a specific context. I stood there in the understory of an alien forest on a Category 7 planet, and I thought about that, and my chromatophores settled slowly from blue-white to amber, and then eventually, over the next few minutes, to gold. Back at camp that evening, Marcus debriefed the cataloging encounters with Suvek and made notes in the shared field log. The Carvel encounter went in as a routine contact, territorial signaling, non-escalated, no intervention required. He described it in 3 clean sentences. 3 sentences. To me, in the understory with my chromatophores screaming, it had felt like one of the larger moments of my academic career. To the field log, it was 3 sentences. Ileva, reading over my shoulder, said quietly, he does this. Does what? Makes things smaller than they are, not by lying, by having a different baseline. I looked at Marcus, who was helping Vethrix fix a calibration error in one of the perimeter sensors. Different baseline, I repeated. His baseline is higher than ours, Ileva said. She said it without resentment, just as information. What reads as frightening to us reads as normal to him, and what reads as extreme to him is something we probably can't even benchmark. I thought about Thresh IV. Has anyone asked him, I said. About what? About what his frightening looks like. Ileva was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't think any of us have the reference frame to understand the answer. Part 4, the assignment. On the morning of Day 2, Suvek gathered us before breakfast and formally opened the Phase 2 volunteer question. The cache recovery requires a minimum of 2 personnel, he said. 1 designated team member, he nodded to Marcus, and 1 volunteer from the cohort. The assignment is rated at the upper limit of what the exchange program considers appropriate for non-human advanced students. It is voluntary. There is no academic penalty for declining. 17 students of 11 species sat with that information. I was sitting at the far end of the group. I had been thinking about the river crossing since 3 a.m. local time. I had been thinking about what Marcus had said, decisions like that are better made when you're rested. I had slept. I had rested. I had thought. I'll go, I said. Everyone looked at me. Marcus looked at me. His expression was unreadable for a moment, and then it settled into something that I can only describe as evaluating, not in a judgmental way, in the way of someone doing a rapid, honest assessment of a situation. You're sure? Suvek said. I've reviewed the terrain data, I said. I believe I can make the crossing. My species is rated Category 4 biological tolerance. The projected exposure parameters are within that range. Suvek nodded slowly. Noted. Marcus looked at me for another moment. Then he picked up his coffee. He always had coffee. He'd brought a full supply in his personal equipment allocation, and I'd started to suspect it was less a preference and more a biological dependency, and said, "Okay, we'll walk the route together before we commit." That was it. No fanfare. No acknowledgement that I just agreed to accompany him into the most challenging section of a Category 7 field environment. Just, we'll walk the route together before we commit. I exhaled very slowly and my neck went amber and I thought, good. Okay, this is fine. We departed for Sector 7G at 800. The route took us northeast from base camp, through a stretch of open terrain that was almost pleasant, low vegetation, good visibility, the wind manageable. Then we hit the ridgeline that separated the base camp quadrant from the high elevation section where the cache was located, and the terrain changed. The ridge was not technically difficult. It was steep, and the rock was the same dense mineral composite that made the anchor stakes hard to drive, which meant it was solid underfoot. That was good. What was less good was that the ridge's elevation brought us above the lower wind current and into the secondary current that came off the mountain range, and that current was stronger and more lateral, and for about 40 minutes of climbing, we were dealing with gusts that came without much warning. Marcus went first. He moved up the ridge with that same gathered, efficient quality I'd seen in the understory, no wasted motion, weight distributed, hands available. He pointed out footholds, called back the locations of loose sections, and once, when a particularly sharp gust hit while I was mid-step, he was simply there, a steadying hand on my arm, not pulling me, just present. Good, take a breath. Next step is that shelf to the left. I took the step, we continued. The view from the ridge was worth it. I say that knowing how it sounds. I was on a Category 7 field assignment in active wind conditions on an alien planet, ascending toward a data recovery mission in a section designated Elevated Environmental Complexity, and I'm telling you the view was worth it. It was. Carveth IV from elevation was something else entirely. The canopy below us was so dense it looked like solid matter, like you could walk across it. The river system that ran through Sector 7G was visible from the ridge, a silver-gray thread cutting through the dark green, and it was running fast. Even from up here I could tell it was running fast. There's the crossing zone, Marcus said, pointing. He'd pulled out the topographic display and was comparing it to what we could see. The middle one, see that, where the channel narrows and the bank rises? I looked, I found it, yes. The gradient there is steeper than it looks on the map, probably 8 to 10 degrees, but the bottom substrate is what matters, if it's uniform. It'll hold. It'll hold, he confirmed. He put the display away. How are you feeling? My neck is amber, I said. Is that bad? It means I'm alert and cautious but not panicking. That's a good place to be, Marcus said. Stay in amber. Amber is operational. We started down the other side of the ridge. Part 5, Sector 7G. The river was louder than I expected. I mean that physically. It was a sound that filled the air in Sector 7G in a way that made other sounds feel secondary. The Carvel sounds, the wind in the higher vegetation, the distant geological creaking of the mountain range. All of it was present, but beneath this constant, rushing, churning percussion. The river was maybe 8 meters wide at the middle crossing point. Not huge, but running fast and dark, carrying suspended sediment and probably the occasional dislodged tree section from upstream. Marcus stood on the bank and studied it. He was doing a thing I'd started to recognize, the same thing he'd done with the Carvel, the same thing he'd done with the Ridge. He was reading it, taking it apart into components: current speed, bank stability, depth indicators from the water behavior, potential hazards, processing it the way a very good navigator processes a star map. Depth at the crossing zone is probably chest height at the deepest point, he said. For me, which means, for me it might be above my head at the low points, I said. My Sorathi build is shorter than a human. Yeah, he thought about this. Okay, I'm going to fix a line across first. Once it's fixed, you use the line, don't try to balance on the current alone. You have line in the pack. 20 meters of tensile cord with anchor attachments. Standard. He was already pulling it out. I'll anchor this side first, cross, find a good anchor point on the far side. Once it's set, you follow the line. Keep your weight uphill of it. The current will push you downstream. The line keeps you oriented. And if the anchor fails? Marcus looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has heard a worry and found it reasonable rather than dismissible. I'll be on the far bank. If the anchor fails and you go downstream, you go with the current, don't fight it, and I'll get ahead of you on the bank. There's a natural eddy about 30 meters down. That's your target. He said it calmly. He said it like someone describing what happens if the synthesis unit breaks down and you need to make food manually. Here are the steps. Here is the contingency. You've done this before, I said. Different rivers, he said. Same physics. He crossed first. Watching Marcus Akefer cross that river was one of the more remarkable things I have seen in my academic career. And I've said that twice now about 2 different things involving him, which is probably telling. He entered the water at the top of the crossing zone, where the channel was slightly shallower, and he moved into the current with his body angled upstream, leaning into it, not fighting it, using his weight as a counterforce against the push. The cord was fixed to the upstream anchor and paid out from his pack as he crossed. When the depth reached his waist, which was further than I'd expected before it reached his chest, he slowed, adjusted his angle, kept moving. The current was pushing against him. I could see it. I could see the force of it in the way he had to continually adjust. Not dramatize, adjust. When he hit the deep section, maybe 4 meters wide in the center where the depth was greatest, his progress slowed. The water was at his chest. He was moving with the careful, deliberate cadence of someone who has decided that haste at this moment would be expensive. He made it. He came out the far side dripping and immediately moved to find an anchor point for the cord, a dense root system at the base of a large tree, close to the bank. He fixed the cord, tested it again, and then turned and waved. Line is set, he called across. The river took some of the sound. Come across, angle upstream, don't rush. My neck was blue-white. I entered the water. It was cold in a way that hit differently than I expected, not just temperature cold, but force cold. The current pushing against my legs was a physical object, something with intentions, something that wanted to take me somewhere I wasn't planning to go. I grabbed the line, felt it taut and reliable under my hands, and I started moving. Marcus was on the far bank talking the whole time. Good, that's good, keep your grip, lean into it slightly, you're doing well. His voice was calm, not performatively calm, genuinely calm, like there was no version of this where he wasn't going to be here, watching, ready. The deep section. Water at my collarbone, my feet still on the bottom mostly. The current at this depth was making very strong suggestions about where I should be going. I kept my grip on the line. I kept my feet moving. You're 2/3 across, Marcus said. The depth peaks right here and then comes up fast. You're almost through the worst of it. The depth peaked. It peaked right at my jaw. Water at my jaw. My feet were moving in small, careful steps, and the current was a constant lateral force, and the line was the most important thing I had ever touched. Then the bottom started coming up. 2 steps, 3 steps, and the water was at my chest, then at my waist, and then I was moving faster because the current was less and the ground was more, and then I was on the far bank. I stood on the far bank of that river, and my entire body was shaking, and I was soaking wet, and my chromatophores were cycling through every color they were capable of, because my autonomic nervous system had apparently decided that this was the appropriate response. Marcus was next to me. He put a hand on my shoulder, not heavy, just present. "Good," he said. "You did well." "My neck," I said. I couldn't even finish the sentence. "I know," he said. "Give it a moment." I gave it a moment. After about 90 seconds, which I counted, the shaking eased and my chromatophores settled into a shaky amber. Not quite gold, but amber. "How far to the cache site?" I asked. Marcus checked the map. "About 400 meters through that section of high cover," he pointed. "Terrain looks manageable. 15 minutes, maybe 20. "Let's go," I said. He looked at me with that evaluating expression again. Then he nodded. We went. Part 6, the cache. 400 meters in that terrain took us about 25 minutes. The high cover section was dense, the kind of vegetation that closes overhead and reduces the light to something green and filtered and slightly unreal. The ground was wet, and the root systems of the large trees in this section ran close to the surface, which meant every step required attention. Not difficult attention, just constant, present attention. We found 2 more carvel. Or rather, we heard them. Marcus signaled me to stop. We waited. He ran the assessment I'd seen before, and we rerouted around them with a wide arc that added 6 minutes to the transit but kept us out of their territory. He did it without drama, like changing lanes. The cache site was in a rock shelter, a natural overhang in an outcropping that the previous survey team had identified as stable, which is why they'd cached the equipment there before evacuating. The shelter had protected it from the precipitation events that had followed. We came out of the tree cover into a clearing maybe 30 meters across, and there it was, a dull gray equipment case, half covered in leaf litter, sitting exactly where the map said it would be. Marcus went still. Just for a moment, just one beat. Then he let out a breath. Long, controlled, and in the exhale there was something that might have been relief or satisfaction or both. "There it is," he said. He said it like he'd been looking for it for a while, not in a dramatic way, in the way of someone who had been holding a quiet, focused attention on a goal and was now watching it resolve. We crossed the clearing. The case was intact. The seals were still holding. Marcus checked them, ran the diagnostics. The case had its own power cell that had maintained environmental control through the storage period, and confirmed that the data archive inside was undamaged. Then he sat down on a flat rock near the case and took a water bottle out of his pack and drank from it, slowly. I sat down next to him. The rock shelter's overhang was doing something useful. It blocked most of the wind, and in the relative quiet you could hear the specific sounds of the forest more clearly. Bird-equivalent calls from something in the canopy, the distant sound of the river, the specific creak of large trees in wind. "You do this," I said. He looked at me. "Every time something finishes," I said, "you stop, you breathe." "Yeah," he said, "habit." "From where?" He drank some more water. "From learning what happens if you don't." He recapped the bottle. "You run one adrenaline state into the next and eventually your system doesn't know how to come down. The stop is important. It tells your body, that part is done. Now we're in a different part." Is that a thing they teach in field studies training? They mention it, but most people learn it the hard way. Including you. He looked at the forest for a moment. Yeah, including me. I thought about what I wanted to ask next. It had been building since the first night on station, since Ileva's comment about baselines, since the river, since the Carvel. What happened on Threshiv? I said. Marcus was quiet for a bit. Tidal surge event, he said. Faster onset than the models predicted. We had a team of 8 in a coastal survey zone. The surge hit while 3 of us were in the field. By the time the station issued evacuation warnings, we had maybe 6 minutes before the surge front reached the survey zone. 6 minutes? Yeah. The station was at higher elevation. 2 of us made it. The third, he stopped. Something in his expression shifted, not the dramatic grief of a story being told, but the quiet, worn-down weight of something that doesn't go away. The third had been injured earlier in the survey day. She couldn't move as fast. I went back for her. You went back? Yeah. And we both made it, he said. Barely. I had her over my shoulder for the last 2 minutes. We cleared the surge line about 30 seconds before the front hit. He paused. The other member of the team who'd gone ahead to the station, he had nightmares about it for months. He told me later the hardest part was watching from the station window and thinking we weren't going to make it. What did you think? I asked. Marcus looked at me. I didn't think, he said. I ran. He said it simply, not like a hero would say it, like someone describing a reflex, something that happened before decision, something so deeply embedded in him that calling it choice would almost be inaccurate. I sat with that for a moment. Does it scare you? I said, looking back at it. He was quiet for a bit. Yeah, he said, in retrospect it scares me very much. He almost smiled. At the time I was just running. Part 7, the return. We were 20 minutes into the return transit when the weather changed. I noticed it first in the light. The green-filtered quality of it deepened, went darker. Then the sound of the wind in the canopy changed register. Then Marcus looked up. We need to move faster, he said. He wasn't alarmed. He was calibrated. There is a difference, and I was getting better at reading which one was which. We moved faster. The precipitation event that hit Sector 7G that afternoon was described in the field report afterward as a rapid-onset localized weather system with dynamic precipitation characteristics. What this meant in practice was that it rained with force. Not gently, not progressively. One moment it was overcast and the wind had a new quality to it, and then the sky opened up, and the sound of water hitting leaves and ground and our suits was so total it was almost inside us. Marcus pulled up the terrain overlay on his wrist display without slowing down. River is going to rise, he said, raising his voice over the rain. How fast depends on the catchment upstream. If we hit the crossing in the next 20 minutes, we should be okay. If we waited out, the river might rise too much to cross safely. And base camp? Base camp is at a higher elevation. They're not in flood risk. He was moving and mapping simultaneously. We have 2 options, push for the crossing now or find high ground here and wait. You're asking me. You're my team, he said. Yeah. I looked at the map overlay on his display. I looked at the sky. I thought about the river. Cross now, I said, before it rises. My read too, he said. Let's go. We hit the bank of the river 18 minutes later. The river had already risen. Not dramatically, maybe 15 to 20 centimeters from when we'd crossed before, but the current was visibly faster, and the surface was breaking differently, carrying more debris. Marcus looked at it. The assessment process again fast now, with the rain still coming down. Line is still fixed, he said. He could see the cord still attached to the far bank anchor. The tension has changed, the current is pulling it more, but it's holding. He turned to me. You go first this time. You went first before. I went first before to set the line, he said. Now the line is set. I want you across while I can see you from the bank. If anything goes wrong, I need to be in position to respond. He meant he wanted to be on the bank in case he needed to go in after me. I understood that. I understood it in a way that was hard to describe, not intellectually, but in the way you understand something when you feel it. Okay, I said. I entered the water. The current was faster. My recognition of that was immediate and physical. It pushed against me differently with more insistence. But the line was there. The line was solid. I moved along the line, kept my angle, felt my feet finding the bottom, and I thought about what Marcus had said in the shelter. The stop tells your body that part is done. Now we're in a different part. I was in the part where I crossed the river. I was doing that part. The deep section was deeper now, water at my chin instead of my jaw. The current at that depth was more forceful. I tightened my grip on the line. Good, Marcus said from the bank behind me. Calm, you're through the deepest part, keep moving. I kept moving. When I got to the far bank, I grabbed the root system of the anchor tree and hauled myself out, and I turned around and Marcus was already in the water. He crossed it faster than I did, significantly faster. Not recklessly, he was still reading it, still adjusting, but faster, with a fluency that was the difference between someone who knows a language academically and someone who grew up speaking it. He came out of the water on my side and immediately moved to the anchor, assessed it, recovered the line, and coiled it. He turned around. He was wet. The rain was still coming down. His expression was focused and entirely composed. Good, he said. We're across. Yes, I said. How are you? Amber, I said. He smiled, a real one, quick and genuine. Amber is good. Amber means operational. You said that before, I said. It's still true, he said. Part 8, back to camp. The rain eased on the ridge crossing and had mostly stopped by the time we reached the base camp perimeter. The rest of the cohort had seen us coming on the perimeter sensors, and most of them were at the shelter entrance when we came in. Ileva, Wurak, Vethrix, Pylos, and 14 others, and Suvek, all of them reading the return of 2 wet, tired field students who were carrying a recovered data cache. The reaction in the group was something I have thought about a lot since. For the human students I've met since Carveth IV, what happened in Sector 7G would have been, in narrative terms, an adventure, something to tell. A river crossing in rising water, a precipitation event, the cache recovered, the return accomplished. Good story. For the 17 non-human students of 11 species standing at the shelter entrance looking at us, it was something else. Wurak made the low drum sound. It was a long one this time, resonant, continuous. I found out later that particular vocalization in Thuvian communication is used at the conclusion of something, not a celebration exactly, but an acknowledgement. That thing happened. That thing is now past. Vethrix's secondary jaw was still. The clicking had stopped. Pylos looked at Marcus for a long moment, all 3 translucent eyelids cycling slowly, and then he said, in a very precise meridian tone, You recovered the cache. Yep, Marcus said. In Sector 7G. Yep. During a dynamic precipitation event. That's an accurate description. Pylos was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I would like to observe that you appear remarkably untroubled. Marcus looked at himself, wet jacket, damp hair, the composed expression that apparently never really went anywhere. Then he looked at Pylos. We completed the assignment, he said. Everyone is fine. The data is intact. He held up the cache case, which was still sealed and reading green on its diagnostic panel. That's the outcome we were aiming for. But the conditions were within parameters, Marcus said. Difficult parameters, but parameters. He went inside to change out of his wet gear. The group stood for a moment in the aftermath of his exit. Then Ileva said, quietly to nobody in particular, "He genuinely means that." "Yes," I said. "That's the thing, isn't it?" she said. "He's not performing calm, he's just—" She paused, searching for the word. "Calibrated," I said. That was the word I'd landed on in the shelter in the river on the ridge. "Calibrated," she repeated. She looked at the shelter entrance where Marcus had gone. "His calibration is just set at a different point than ours." That evening, the last evening on Carveth IV, Suvek opened the field log, and we completed the Phase 1 and Phase 2 documentation as a group. The cache data was loaded into the shared archive. The environmental monitoring data was compressed and formatted for upload. Everything was named and dated and correctly attributed. Then Suvek set aside the official documentation, poured something into a cup from a personal flask, and said, "I'd like to hear from each of you about what you learned. Not in an academic way, not formally, just what did you learn?" Students talked about the atmospheric calibration, the geological substrate, the Carvel behavior. Wurek talked about how the Thuvian vibration sense had actually been useful in reading terrain stability. Pylos talked about species contact protocol. Ileva talked about sensor recalibration in mineral-rich environments. When it got to me, I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I learned what it looks like when someone has a different relationship with fear than I do." The shelter was quiet. "I was afraid for most of this assignment," I said. "That's not a criticism of the assignment, that's just the truth. My chromatophores were amber or blue-white almost the entire time, and Marcus was—" I stopped and thought about how to say this. Marcus was present, he was focused. He felt the same things we felt, I know that, because I asked and he told me, but he was in a relationship with those feelings that I had never seen before. He used them, and watching him do that was the thing that helped me stay operational. I looked down at the table for a moment. "I crossed the river because I watched him do it first," I said. "I crossed the river in the rain on the way back because he trusted me enough to go first and be the one watching. And I think the word for what he did, both times, is lead. Not by telling me what to do, just by being the thing I could use as a reference point when everything else was uncertain." The shelter was quiet for a moment after that. Marcus, who was sitting across the table with his coffee, looked at me. Something in his expression that I couldn't fully read, warm and aware, and slightly private. "For what it's worth," he said, "you never needed me as much as you thought you did." "You don't know that," I said. "I was watching," he said. "You read the terrain data correctly. You called the middle crossing before I confirmed it. You chose to volunteer when you didn't have to. And you made the return crossing in rising water during active precipitation without my having to talk you through it step by step." He paused. "Those aren't things I did. Those are things you did." My chromatophores went, not amber, not gold. They went a color I don't have a word for in galactic standard, something between the two. Something that maybe doesn't exist in the Sorathi emotional lexicon, because I'd never felt exactly that before. Part 9, the debrief. We left Carveth IV on the morning of Day 4. The Phase 3 extraction went smoothly, which in the context of the previous 3 days felt almost anticlimactic, and I was aware that the smoothness of it was partly because everything that could go wrong had already been navigated. On the shuttle back to Vethara Station, the cabin was different from the outbound journey. The same 19 students in the same seats, more or less, but the quality of the silence was different. Outbound, we had all been performing calm. Return, we were actually calm, tired, satisfied in the specific, deep way that comes from having done something difficult. I was at the window again, same seat. Outside, Carveth IV was receding, the green dark canopy, the cloud layers, the mountain range visible now from above, getting smaller, getting safe. Marcus was a few rows ahead. He was asleep. Just asleep, head tilted slightly against the hull wall, eyes closed, breathing even. The way someone sleeps who knows how to take the rest when it's available. I watched him for a moment. I'd been around humans before, at the university hub on Deathworlder Station. I'd had classes adjacent to human students, eaten in common areas where humans were present, heard them in the corridors. I thought I had a reasonable sense of what they were. I did not have a reasonable sense of what they were. I had a surface knowledge. The way you have a surface knowledge of a deep ocean from looking at it from above, you know the color, the scale, the fact of it. You do not know what's in it. You do not know how it moves from the inside. What I had learned on Horrified IV was that humanity, the deep version of it, the version that went to Thresh IV in the first year and carried someone out of a tidal surge and came back the next year for more, was not a thing you understood by reading survey data. You understood it by crossing a river with one. At Deathworlder Station, there was a debrief session with the exchange program committee. Formal, recorded, we each made individual reports. Mine was 3 pages in Galactic Standard. I covered the atmospheric calibration, the Carvel contacts, the cache recovery, the precipitation event crossing. At the end, the committee moderator, a Sorathi, not Sorathi, a different species entirely, asked if I had any general observations about the cohort experience. I thought about what to say. I thought about Marcus crossing the river, gathering the current, moving through it. I thought about him in the understory with the Carvel, calm, positioned, turning the emitter on. I thought about the shelter, the data cache, the water at my chin, the line in my hands. I think, I said, that the value of a Category 7 field assignment is not the difficulty itself. The difficulty is the context. The value is what the difficulty reveals about the members of your team. About what they're actually made of when the situation strips away the layers that aren't essential. I paused. I learned a great deal about Horrified IV. I learned more about myself. And I learned something about what humanity is that I don't think I could have learned any other way. The committee moderator made a note. And what, she said, did you learn about humanity? I thought about this carefully. That they process experience differently than we do, I said. Not better. Not it's not a hierarchy, but differently. The relationship between fear and action is it's different in structure. It runs in parallel instead of in sequence. They feel the fear and take the action simultaneously, where most of us feel the fear and then have to move through it to get to the action. I paused. Marcus described it as using the fear, not suppressing it, using it. And that helped you. It gave me a framework I didn't have before. I looked at my hands on the table in front of me. I still felt fear on Horrified IV. I am not claiming I stopped feeling it. I crossed the river afraid. But I understood, watching him, that feeling afraid and being capable were not mutually exclusive, that the fear was information, not a verdict. The committee moderator looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, that may be the most accurate description of what these assignments are designed to teach that I have received in 11 cycles of this program. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded and gathered my notes and went out into the corridor. Epilogue: What remains? I'm writing this from the hub station at Deathworlder, 6 weeks after Horrified IV. The field report was submitted, graded, and returned with comments. The cache data turned out to be valuable. The previous survey team had documented a geological formation in Sector 7G that has implications for our understanding of the mineral composition of the entire region. That data is now part of the permanent academic archive. Marcus and I have kept in contact. It's not a frequent correspondence. He's busy, I'm busy. The standard conditions of academic life apply, but we talk sometimes. He's currently completing his third-year field requirements, which I understand will involve something in the high radiation survey discipline. When he told me this, very casually, during a scheduled comm exchange, my chromatophores went amber for about 4 seconds before I got them back. He thought it was funny. I told him my chromatophores were a medical fact, not a comedy act. He said both could be true. He was right. I've thought a lot about what Ileva said on the first night, about baselines, about the idea that Marcus's baseline, his internal calibration point for what constitutes danger, what constitutes manageable difficulty, what constitutes normal, is set at a different point than ours. I've thought about the fact that this is not unique to Marcus. It's not a personality trait, not an exceptional individual. It's a species characteristic. Every human who has ever existed was born on that oxygen-rich, high-gravity, adversarial biosphere world, and even the ones who never do a single day of field studies in their lives carry the echo of what that world produces. They are, at the biological level, built for conditions that would challenge or kill most of the known sentient species in the settled systems, and they don't know it. Or rather, they know it the way you know a fact, but they don't experience it as remarkable. It's just what they are. It's just their baseline. The dangerous assignment was nothing to Marcus. Not because he didn't feel what we felt. Because he came from a world that decided, over 4.5 billion years of biology, that feeling that and continuing anyway was the whole point. There's a thing that happens, I've been told, when new species first make contact with human civilization. A moment of recalibration, a recognition that the galaxy you thought you understood has a dimension in it that your models didn't account for. I had that moment on Carveth IV. Not when Marcus drove the anchor stake by hand, not when he crossed the river first, not even when he came out of the water on the return crossing, wet and composed, and said we're across like it was a calendar item we'd completed. I had it in the rock shelter, with the rain starting outside, and the data cache sealed beside us, and Marcus sitting on a flat rock drinking water and telling me, in the straightforward tone of someone reporting a fact, that he'd carried a person out of a tidal surge on Thresh IV, and it had terrified him in retrospect. In retrospect, the terror came after, because during he was just running. That's the thing about Deathworlders. The universe is a dangerous place. It's always been a dangerous place. For most of us, that fact is the weight we carry, the thing we manage, plan around, protect against. It shapes how we move through the world. For humans, it's a different relationship entirely. The universe is dangerous. They're just one of the dangerous things in it. And somehow, sitting on a rock in Sector 7G of a Category 7 planet with the rain coming down and the river rising and the Carvel somewhere in the forest, that felt not frightening. It felt like the most reassuring thing I'd ever understood.